Today we're going to dive into one of the most distressing and frightening scenarios in modern horror. 7 horror stories involving situations in which people were left without signal, with no way out and no help. Get ready to hear chilling stories of people who found themselves completely isolated, with no communication, no escape route, and no one to help. We're going to explore real and suspenseful stories, showing how despair and fear increase when the only thing left is to face danger alone. So, sit back, make sure your cell phone is charged, and let's start this chilling journey. Oh, and before you run out of signal, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like. This helps the channel a lot and ensures that you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go. 1. The cut signal. They say the best horror stories are the ones that could happen to anyone. This one, unfortunately, did happen. Police records and survivors' testimonies are available for anyone to research. However, out of respect for those involved, the names have been changed. It all started on a Friday in September when 4 friends, Lucas, Clara, Antoine, and Sophie, decided to spend a long weekend at a secluded farm on the outskirts of Limoges in the French countryside. The idea was to escape their routine, breathe fresh air, and enjoy the tranquility of the countryside. Antoine had found the house advertised on a rural property rental website. The photos showed a stone building surrounded by green fields and dense forests, miles from any village. The trip was uneventful. They arrived at dusk in high spirits, laughing and taking photos. The house was even more charming in person. Old windows, a stone fireplace, rustic furniture. But they soon realized that there was no cell phone signal. Antoine, ever practical, said it was good for a detox from technology. The house's landline seemed to work, but no one bothered to test it. They were there to relax. On the first night, after a dinner filled with local wine, they sat chatting in the living room, listening to the wind outside. Around midnight, they began to hear strange noises outside. Soft footsteps on the gravel, as if someone were walking around the house. Lucas, trying to reassure the group, suggested that they were just animals. But the footsteps were rhythmic, human. Clara, restless, peered out the window, but saw nothing but darkness. The next day, they found fresh footprints near the back door. They weren't theirs. Sophie, more sensitive, insisted that they call someone, but the landline was dead. Antoine tried the cell phone in different parts of the house, even standing on a chair near the window, but nothing. The signal was dead. Tensions mounted. They decided to check the area during the day. About 50 yards from the house, they found cut wires hanging from an old telephone pole. Someone had sabotaged the telephone line. Their car was parked next to the house, but when they tried to start it, they realized the tank was empty. They had filled up before arriving, so this didn't make sense. Clara suggested that someone had drained the gas during the night. Fear set in. On the second night, they locked all the doors and windows. The wind seemed stronger, and the noises outside seemed closer. Around 2 in the morning, they heard a soft knock on the front door, followed by footsteps running around the house. Sophie began to cry. Lucas tried to keep calm, grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Antoine suggested that they stay together in the living room, away from the windows. Time seemed to stand still. The fear was almost palpable, a suffocating presence. At one point, they heard the sound of breaking glass in the garage. Antoine ran there, but found only the shattered window and a shadow fleeing into the forest. The feeling of being watched was constant. The next morning, they decided to try to leave on foot. They packed backpacks with food and water, planning to follow the dirt road to the nearest village, about 10 kilometers away. But when they left, they found that all the trails were blocked by branches, logs, and barbed wire. It was impossible to get through without getting hurt. Someone wanted to keep them there. Desperation gripped the group. They spent the day trying to find alternative routes, but were always blocked by carefully placed obstacles. At night, the terror increased. Flashlights could be seen between the trees circling the house. Voices whispered in French, but it was impossible to understand what they were saying. The group hid in the basement, trying to be quiet. At dawn, they heard heavy footsteps above their heads. Someone was inside the house. Lucas held the knife in trembling hands, while Clara tried to calm Sophie. Antoine, always rational, whispered escape plans, but no one had the courage to move. Time dragged on until dawn. When they finally went upstairs, they found a room ransacked, doors open, and mud marks on the floor. But the intruders were gone, at least for now. They decided they could wait no longer. They grabbed what they could carry and, ignoring the obstacles, ran down the main trail, scratching themselves on branches and cutting themselves on wires. They walked for hours, exhausted, until they finally spotted an old pickup truck on the road. The driver, a local farmer, found the group's condition strange and took them to the village police station. There, they reported everything they had experienced. The police investigated the farm, but never found the perpetrators. All they found were tire tracks, footprints, and the remains of an improvised camp in the forest. Investigators concluded that it was a group of local criminals, known for breaking into isolated properties and terrorizing visitors, but they were never able to arrest them. The friends never returned to the camp. The case was filed as breaking and entering an attempted kidnapping, but to this day, no one knows exactly what happened during those nights. Only that, somewhere in the French countryside, there's a house where the signal is cut off, the exits are blocked, and help never arrives in time. 2. Road of No Return. Official records of the disappearance of Erik Johansson and Mia Larsson, which occurred in October 2017, are still being consulted by police and curious onlookers in the Hedmark region, in the interior of Norway. The case, marked by disturbing details, is often cited as a warning to those who decide to venture into unknown shortcuts in isolated areas of the country. Erik and Mia, both Norwegians, had been together for 2 years and decided to take a road trip to a small cabin that Mia's family had inherited near Lake Femunden. The drive, which normally takes about 4 hours, was winding roads and dense forests, but to save time, Erik suggested a shortcut he had found on his GPS. The back road, almost a dirt track, seemed promising, cutting miles off the journey. As they entered the road, the asphalt soon gave way to gravel and mud. The sky, which had been clear, was covered by heavy clouds. The cell phone signal quickly disappeared, but the couple did not worry. The radio also lost its frequency, leaving only the muffled sound of the engine and the wind cutting through the trees. The forest seemed to close in around the car, making the environment increasingly oppressive. After an hour, the car began to have problems. The engine was misfiring, and a strange burning smell filled the interior. Erik stopped the vehicle next to a clearing. He tried to restart the engine, but nothing happened. Mia got out to breathe, feeling the intense cold, typical of the Norwegian autumn. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the rustling of the leaves. They were completely alone. Erik opened the hood, but couldn't identify the problem. Mia suggested they walk back to the last village they had passed, but Erik insisted they wait for a car. They didn't know it, but that road was rarely used, especially outside of the fishing season. As they argued, Mia had the feeling that she was being watched. She looked into the dense forest, and, for a brief moment, she thought she saw a silhouette among the trees. She didn't mention it to Erik, thinking it was just paranoia. But as time passed, the feeling grew stronger. The wind seemed to carry whispers, and, sometimes, branches broke as if someone was stepping on them. Time passed slowly. It was getting colder, and the daylight was starting to fade. Erik tried to turn on his cell phone, but there was no signal. They decided to walk along the road in search of help, carrying only a flashlight and some cereal bars. After about 20 minutes of walking, they heard a noise behind them, like hurried footsteps in the vegetation. They stopped but saw nothing. Fear began to grow. They kept walking, but the feeling of being followed intensified. Mia, trembling, asked them to get back in the car, but Erik thought it best to keep going. That was when they saw fresh boot prints in the mud, going back and forth between the road and the forest. It was impossible to know how long they had been there, but they seemed recent. Suddenly, they heard a whistling sound coming from the forest. It wasn't the sound of the wind, but a human whistling, rhythmic, almost like a children's melody. Mia squeezed Erik's hand, and they quickened their pace. The whistling stopped, but soon came from another point, further ahead. It was as if someone was surrounding them, guiding their steps. Night fell quickly, making the road even more eerie. The flashlight began to fail. In a moment of desperation, Mia suggested that they go into the woods to hide, but Erik refused, saying that it was safer to stay on the road. They tried to remain calm, but they knew that they were being watched. When they thought about getting back to the car, they realized they were completely disoriented. The road seemed endless, and the landmarks they had passed before were no longer there. The whistling returned, now accompanied by the sounds of footsteps and branches breaking. Erik tried to shout for help, but his voice was lost in the void. Suddenly, they saw a dim light between the trees. It looked like a flashlight. They ran towards the light, but as they approached, it went out. Instead, they found an old wooden cabin, apparently abandoned. The door was ajar, and inside there were signs of recent presence. A still warm mug, a blanket thrown over a chair, and on the table, a map of the region with the road where they were going circled in red. Fear turned to panic. Mia wanted to leave immediately, but Eric suggested that perhaps they could find help. Then they heard heavy footsteps on the porch. Someone was outside, blocking the exit. They hid behind a cabinet, trying to control their breathing. The door creaked, and a shadow stepped in, scanning the room. The intruder seemed to know exactly where to look. After minutes that seemed like hours, the footsteps moved away. The couple took the opportunity to climb out of the back window and run back to the road. They didn't know where they were going, they just ran, guided by their survival instinct. The whistling came back, this time closer, almost next to them. They ran until they couldn't take it anymore. When they finally stopped, they were back at the spot where the car had broken down. But the car was no longer there. On the ground, there were only tire marks and footprints leading towards the forest. Despair took over. No car, no signal, no direction. The cold was increasing, and the night seemed to have no end. The next morning, a truck driver found Mia, alone, wandering the road in shock. Eric was never found. Mia reported everything to the police, but little evidence was found. The case remains unsolved. To this day, locals avoid the road, and many claim to hear whistling sounds coming from the forest at dusk. 3. The parking lot attendant. The Emily Carter case, which occurred in Toronto in the winter of 2019, is still cited in corporate security training and reports on urban crime. The underground parking lot of the Aurora building in the city's financial center has become a symbol of warning for those who believe that, in monitored environments, they are always safe. The police records, testimonies, and images from security cameras make up a dossier that, to this day, sends shivers down the spines of those who consult it. Emily was a data analyst at a tech company. She stayed late that Friday to finish an urgent report. The building was almost empty when she turned off her computer, put away her bag, and took the elevator down to the basement. The parking lot, normally bustling during the day, was deserted and quiet. The cold LED lights cast long shadows between the parked cars. Emily noticed that there was no cell phone signal, but she didn't worry. She could just get to her car, get out, and call her boyfriend on the way home. As she walked down the hallway, she heard a metallic noise, like a door slamming in the distance. She stopped for a moment, trying to identify the source, but the sound stopped. She pointed the key to unlock the car, but nothing happened. She figured the battery in the remote control was low and kept walking, feeling the echo of her own footsteps reverberate across the concrete. As she passed one of the security cameras, she had the strange sensation that she was being watched. She forced a smile to herself, trying to dispel her nervousness. When he got to his car, he noticed that the driver's door was ajar. His heart raced. He looked around but saw no one. He tried to call his boyfriend, but his cell phone showed no service. He decided to get in quickly, but as he sat down in the seat, he felt a chill run down his spine. There was a sheet of paper on the dashboard with a message. "I see you." Frightened, she got out of the car and ran toward the exit, but the automatic door was locked. She pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. She got back into the car, locked the doors, and tried to start the engine, but the vehicle wouldn't respond. The dashboard flashed, as if the battery was dead. Emily broke out in a cold sweat, even in the freezing underground air. She looked at the security cameras and noticed that one of them was moving, following her movements. It was impossible. The building's cameras were fixed. Someone was controlling the system remotely. She remembered the night watchman, a quiet man who usually walked around the building but was rarely seen in the parking lot. She tried to wave at the camera, asking for help, but the lens just got closer to her face, as if it were studying her. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker. The parking lot was plunged into intermittent darkness. Emily heard footsteps echoing down the hallway, getting closer and closer. She hid behind a pillar, clutching her cell phone tightly, even though she knew she wouldn't be able to call for help. The footsteps stopped. Absolute silence filled the room. Minutes later, the guard's voice came over the public address system. "You shouldn't be here this late, Emily." She froze. How did he know her name? The voice continued, now lower. "I see everything." I know where you are. Emily tried to run to the emergency stairs, but the door was locked. She tried the handle, but failed. The sound of keys jingling echoed down the hallway. Back in the car, Emily locked herself in and tried to think of a way out. She remembered a small ventilation window in the corner of the parking lot, near the roof. It was narrow, but maybe she could get through. She ran to it, climbed on an abandoned toolbox, and tried to open the window. It was stuck. As she struggled with the window, she heard the guard's voice again, this time closer. "You're not getting out of here." She looked back and saw the silhouette of a tall man, dressed in the uniform of the security company, standing in the dim light. He was holding a set of keys and smiling, as if he were enjoying her distress. Emily screamed for help, but her voice was lost in the concrete. The security guard walked slowly toward her, shuffling his feet. Desperately, Emily managed to force open the window and thrust half of her body out. The guard grabbed her leg, pulling her back. She kicked hard, hitting him in the face. The man backed away, cursing under his breath. Emily seized the moment and threw herself out the window, landing outside in a snow-covered maintenance area. She staggered to the street, where she finally got a signal on her cell phone. She called the police, who arrived minutes later. The security guard was found unconscious in the parking lot, his face covered in blood. Investigations revealed that he had tampered with the security system to lock Emily inside, cutting off her cell phone signal and sabotaging her car. In the security guard's locker, records of other similar cases were found, all involving women who worked late at the building. Emily survived, but never returned to work at the Aurora building. The incident was widely publicized, leading to changes in security protocols in Toronto's underground parking garages. To this day, she avoids empty spaces and never forgets the look on the security guard's face, watching her through the cameras, waiting for the right moment to make his move. What's up, guys? The horror stories with no signal, no way out, and no help are spine-chilling, aren't they? If you're enjoying these suspenseful and tense stories, take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more spine-chilling content. Now, let's get back to the next stories. There's still a lot of fear and isolation ahead. 4. The cottage at the end of the trail. The disappearance of Jonas Keller and Martin Weber, which occurred in October 2018, still intrigues residents of the Graubünden region in the Swiss Alps. The case, shrouded in mystery and disturbing details, was extensively investigated by local police, but never fully solved. The following accounts were reconstructed from the diary found in the chalet and the testimony of the sole survivor. Jonas and Martin, friends since childhood, decided to rent a secluded chalet to spend a week away from the stress of Zurich. The advert promised complete tranquility, a wooden house on top of the mountain, accessible only by a narrow path, with no neighbors within a 10-kilometer radius. The owner, an elderly gentleman, handed them the key in the nearest village, warning them that there was no mobile phone signal at that altitude. "You'll like the silence," he said, smiling enigmatically. The climb was tiring, but the view was worth the effort. The cabin was cozy, with a fireplace, a porch, and large windows overlooking the pine-covered valley. On the first day, the friends explored the surroundings, walked through the forest, and took photos. The isolation felt like a gift. In the evening, they cooked together and talked until late, listening only to the wind and the crackling of the logs. The next morning, Jonas found fresh footprints in the snow near the back door. They weren't theirs. The tracks led all the way to the side of the house and disappeared into the woods. Martin suggested they were from an animal, but Jonas insisted they were human, judging by their shape and size. They decided to ignore them, but the concern remained. By the third day, they began to notice disturbing details. Objects inside the cabin were out of place. A chair scraped, the kitchen window ajar, one of Martin's coats thrown on the floor. They thought they might have been careless, but the feeling that they were being watched only grew. That night, Jonas heard footsteps outside and woke Martin. Together, they lay in silence, listening to the sound of twigs being stepped on and heavy breathing near the wall. Their fear grew, but they tried to rationalize the noises, attributing them to wind or animals. On the fourth day, Jonas suggested that they return to the villa, but Martin thought this was too much. They decided to stay another night, but locked all the doors and windows. Before going to sleep, Jonas wrote in his diary, "Someone is here. I feel like we are being watched." In the early morning, They were awakened by the sound of the back door being forced open. Martin grabbed an iron batten he had found in the basement and stood guard while Jonas tried to call the police, but to no avail. The phone displayed no service. In the morning, they found muddy marks on the kitchen floor and footprints leading into the forest. Jonas wanted to go down to the village, but Martin insisted on waiting until the end of the day, believing that the stranger would not return during the day. They decided to go out and explore the trail, hoping to find a sign or see someone. At every turn, they felt as if they were being followed. They could hear the cracking of branches and figures among the trees, but they could never see who it was. Time seemed to drag on. When they returned to the cottage, they realized that the door was unlocked, although they were both sure they had left everything locked. Inside, they found a kitchen knife stuck in the table and a message written in charcoal on the door. "You are not alone." Panic set in. Jonas wanted to run away immediately, but Martin was in shock. They locked themselves in the cottage and spent the night awake, listening to footsteps circling the house, soft tapping on the windows, and whispers coming from the forest. On the fifth day, the atmosphere grew even more tense. As they went out to collect firewood, they noticed red ribbons tied to trees near the cabin, forming a trail that seemed to lead them deeper into the forest. Jonas tried to follow the ribbons, but Martin stopped him, saying that it was clearly a warning or a trap. They went back inside, but the feeling of claustrophobia grew. Time seemed frozen, and each minute was filled with nervous glances at the windows and frustrated attempts to contact the outside world. That afternoon, they heard a whistle coming from the trail. It was a high-pitched, repetitive sound, as if someone were calling for them. Jonas approached the door, but Martin pulled him back, convinced it was a trap. The whistle stopped, giving way to absolute silence. As darkness fell, the knocking and whispering returned, this time more intense, accompanied by shadows moving quickly outside. On the sixth day, Jonas decided they could wait no longer. They packed their backpacks, grabbed the iron staff, and set off along the trail, even though they knew someone was watching them. Every 100 meters, they found signs of presence: broken branches, red ribbons tied to trees, fresh footprints. The atmosphere was like hunting. The pursuers seemed to know every shortcut, anticipating their movements. When they were exhausted, they heard a whistle coming from the top of the trail. Martin ran in the opposite direction, but Jonas tripped and fell. When he got up, he saw a hooded man standing between the trees, holding a knife. He shouted for Martin, but his friend had already disappeared into the woods. Jonas ran desperately, hearing footsteps behind him, but managed to reach the village just before nightfall, in a state of shock. The police were called and went up to the cabin. They found clear signs of a break-in: footprints, food scraps, ropes, and red ribbons. Jonas's diary was on the table, open to the last page. "If anyone finds this, please know that it was not imagination. We were hunted." Martin was never found. Jonas spent months in therapy, trying to overcome the trauma. The case was filed under disappearance under suspicious circumstances. Locals avoid talking about the chalet at the end of the trail. They say that, to this day, anyone who ventures there feels like they are being watched, and that, in the silence of the Swiss mountains, danger may be closer than one might think. 5. The Last Passenger. The case of Declan Murphy, a ride-hailing driver in Dublin, is one of the most discussed on Irish road safety forums. His disappearance in November 2021 sparked a wave of investigations and speculation that still haunts drivers who work at night. What follows has been reconstructed from ride-hailing records, traffic cameras, and the fragmented testimony of Declan, who was found days later, in a state of shock, wandering along a country road. Declan was known for his punctuality and friendliness. He had been working for the app for almost 2 years, always preferring nighttime rides, when the city was quieter and the passengers were generally more relaxed. On that rainy night, he was thinking about calling it a day when one last request popped up on the app: a ride of about 40 minutes to a rural area north of Dublin. The passenger, identified only as Finn, had an impeccable rating, but the pickup location was unusual, a secluded spot near an industrial park. Declan hesitated, but agreed. The fare was high, and he wanted to end the night on a positive note. When he arrived at the location, he found a tall man in a dark overcoat and hat standing in the light rain. The man got into the car silently, sat in the back seat, and simply confirmed the destination: "Ballymore, please. Take the old road." The drive began in silence. The The man kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching Declan with an uncomfortable intensity. The driver tried to make conversation, but the passenger only responded in monosyllables. The rain was getting heavier, and the road became increasingly deserted. After a few miles, the cell phone signal disappeared. Declan noticed, but didn't worry. It was common in rural areas. As they drove on, the landscape became increasingly inhospitable. Empty fields, abandoned houses, and scattered streetlights. The car's GPS began to fail, recalculating the route over and over again. The passenger then suggested, "You can turn off the GPS. I know the way." Reluctantly, Declan accepted, following only the man's instructions. At one point, they passed an old, rusty iron gate, which the passenger asked to be opened. Declan got out of the car, feeling the cold wind and the uneasy feeling that he was being watched. When he came back, he noticed that the man had moved his backpack, but nothing seemed out of place. They continued their journey along a dirt road, lined with twisted trees and fallen fences. It was completely silent, except for the sound of tires in the mud. When they finally stopped, they were in front of an old stone house, apparently abandoned. The passenger asked Declan to turn off the car and wait. "Just a minute. I need to get something from inside. Don't get out of the car." The driver complied, but his nervousness was palpable. He watched in the rearview mirror as the man walked toward the house, disappearing into the darkness. Minutes passed. Declan decided to call the app center, but his cell phone still had no signal. He tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't respond. That's when he realized the hood was ajar. He got out a check and found cut wires. Panic took over. He quickly got back into the vehicle, locking the doors. Suddenly, he heard footsteps around the car. The passenger was back, but he wasn't alone. Two other men emerged from the shadows, surrounding the vehicle. One of them banged on the window, while the other tried to open the passenger door. Declan screamed, but the sound was lost in the night. The men began to rock the car, laughing softly. The lead passenger walked over to the driver's window, leaned down, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come all the way out here." Declan tried to flee, but the doors were locked from the outside. The men began to hit the car with pieces of wood, breaking the headlights and side mirrors. The driver, in desperation, crawled into the back seat and tried to break down the opposite door, but to no avail. Outside, the men laughed and talked in low voices, as if they were enjoying the victim's terror. After long minutes of tension, the attackers stopped. The main passenger opened the door with a master key, pulled Declan out, and dragged him to the stone house. Inside, the driver was tied to a chair, while the men rummaged through his belongings and asked questions about his life, family, and work. The interrogation was interspersed with threats and laughter. At one point, one of them showed Declan his cell phone, showing photos of his family, saved in the cloud. "We know where you live," said the passenger, smiling disturbingly. Hours passed. Declan could no longer tell time. At some point, he heard sirens in the distance. The men panicked, argued among themselves, and decided to flee, leaving him tied up. The police, alerted by a farmer who had heard screams, arrived in time to free Declan. He was found in a state of shock, unable to explain how it all happened. The investigation revealed that the passenger was using a false identity and that other drivers had disappeared in the same area in the previous months. The case remains unsolved. Declan never drove at night again. The area where it all happened became known as Last Passenger Road, a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk where you least expect them. 6. Missing on the trail. The case of the hikers who disappeared in the Carpathian Mountains in Romania in September 2016 has become one of the most disturbing stories in the local police archives. What was supposed to be an adventure between friends turned into a nightmare that still haunts those who read the testimonies and analyzed the little evidence found. The names have been changed to protect the families. It all started when 4 friends, Daniel, Lucas, Elena, and Pavel, decided to explore one of the lesser-known trails in the Bicege region, famous for its beauty and isolation. They were experienced hikers who had already hiked in other countries and were well-equipped. The idea was to spend 3 days in the forest, camping and recording the adventure in photos and videos. On the first day, everything went according to plan. The group made their way along the trail, marking trees with colored tape and small piles of rocks to secure their way back. The weather was mild, the sky clear. At night, they set up camp near a stream, laughed around the campfire, and slept soundly. The next morning, when they returned to the trail, they noticed that some of the tapes were missing and the piles of rocks had been dismantled. Daniel, the more rational one, suggested that animals might have moved them, but Elena disagreed. The cuts in the tapes were too precise, as if made by a knife. The group continued on, but the atmosphere had changed. The silence of the forest seemed thicker, and everyone felt that they were being watched. As they walked along, they began to notice small objects left along the path. A dirty rag doll, a broken mirror, a rope rolled up in a noose. At first, they thought it was a coincidence, perhaps trash left by other hikers, but they soon realized that the objects seemed to have been placed there on purpose, always ahead of the group, as if someone had predicted their route. When they tried to return to camp, they realized they were disoriented. Their GPS wasn't working and their cell phone signal was gone. The markers they had left behind had all been removed or altered, making it difficult to find their way back. Lucas suggested following the stream, but after hours of walking, they realized they were going in circles. Food was running out, and the atmosphere grew tense. That night, they heard footsteps around the camp and whispers coming from the woods. Daniel tried to calm the group, saying it could be animals or the wind, but no one slept. The next morning, they found fresh human footprints near the tents, as well as more objects. This time a rusty knife and a piece of paper with words in Romanian. "You shouldn't be here." The group panicked. They tried to build smoke signals, but the smoke seemed to dissipate quickly, as if the wind kept changing direction. Elena suggested they climb to a higher point to try to get a cell phone signal, but the climb was steep and full of natural pitfalls, cut branches, holes covered by leaves, slippery rocks. On the third day, Pavel disappeared. The group woke up to find their tent empty, with signs of a struggle all around. They searched for hours, shouting his name, but only found more disturbing objects. Pavel's shoe hanging from a tree, a broken watch, and an old photo of a group of unknown people. Paranoia took over. Daniel began to suspect everything and everyone, including his own friends. When night fell, the remaining three decided not to sleep. They stood together with their backs to a tree, listening to every sound in the forest. At one point, they saw a faint light moving between the trees like a flashlight. Elena wanted to run towards the light, but Daniel stopped her, remembering the objects and the warnings. The light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. On the fourth day, Lucas also disappeared. Only Daniel and Elena remained, exhausted and hungry. They decided to follow a straight line, ignoring trails and signs, trying to get out of the forest at any cost. With each step, they found more signs that they were being guided or hunted. Branches arranged in arrows, stones forming circles, pieces of clothing from their missing friends. Elena, now without strength, fainted. Daniel tried to carry her, but soon he too collapsed from exhaustion. When they woke up, they were in a small makeshift shelter with water and some food nearby. They didn't know who had taken them there. They heard voices in the distance, but they couldn't make out the language. They stayed there for hours, until they were found by a rescue team, alerted by residents of the nearest village who heard screams coming from the forest. Elena and Daniel survived, but were never the same again. Pavel and Lucas were never found. The police investigated, but found no trace of their pursuers, only objects and marks left on the trail. The case was filed as disappearance under suspicious circumstances. Locals avoid that part of the forest, and to this day, hikers report finding strange objects and feeling that they are not alone among the trees of the Carpathians. 7. The apartment next door. The Anna Muller case, which took place in Berlin in the winter of 2022, has become one of the most terrifying stories in the local police archives. The old building on Linienstrasse, with its thick walls and labyrinthine corridors, is still avoided today by those who know the details of what happened there. The following is reconstructed from Anna's diary, found in the apartment, and from the records of the investigation. Anna was a young literature professor who had recently moved from Hamburg. She was looking to start a new life in Berlin, and the apartment seemed perfect, spacious, with large windows, affordable rent, and a central location. The building, built in the early 20th century, had a decadent charm, with a barred elevator and solid wooden doors. The neighbors were discreet, almost invisible. The landlord, a polite gentleman named Herr Kruger, explained that the cell phone signal was poor because of the thick walls, but assured him that the place was safe. For the first few days, Anna devoted herself to organizing books and furniture, excited about this new phase. But soon she began to notice strange things. Whenever she walked down the hallway, she could smell a strong odor of disinfectant coming from the apartment next door. At night, she heard muffled noises, footsteps, furniture scraping, whispers coming from the shared wall. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, as she was leaving for work, she passed a neighbor from 34B. He was a thin, middle-aged man with a fixed gaze and a forced smile. He greeted her by name, even though they had not been introduced. Anna felt a chill, but she attributed it to the nervousness of moving. Over time, she realized that he was always nearby, in the hallway, on the stairs, even in the courtyard, looking in her direction. The discomfort grew when Anna noticed that her letters were being opened before they reached her door. One night, when she tried to call a friend, she realized that there was no cell phone signal in any of the rooms. The landline was also not working. She tried to access the internet, but the connection was unstable. She felt isolated, trapped in a bubble of silence. As the weeks passed, Anna noticed that small personal items were disappearing or moving. An earring left on the table, a favorite pen, even a notebook. She began to suspect herself, but soon realized that it was not a distraction. One night, she found a missing earring carefully placed on the pillow, as if someone wanted to show that they could come and go without being noticed. The tension increased when, one morning, Anna woke up with the feeling of someone watching her. She looked at her bedroom door and saw a shadow moving in the hallway. Her heart raced. She got up, locked the door, and stayed awake until dawn. The next day, she found muddy footprints on the living room carpet, even though she had cleaned it the night before. One night, she heard a soft knocking on the wall. She ignored it, but the knocking grew louder and louder, like a coded message. Anna knocked back, but the answer was complete silence. The next day, she found an anonymous letter under her door. "You are being watched. Beware of your next-door neighbor." Fear set in. She tried to leave the building, but the front door was locked from the inside. The elevator didn't work, and the emergency stairs were blocked by heavy furniture. Anna sought help from the other residents, but no one answered the doors. The building seemed empty. She tried to open the windows, but they were jammed. The only contact she could make was with her Kruger, but he did not answer her calls. She felt completely isolated. That night, she heard footsteps in the hallway and saw her neighbor's shadow moving beneath the door. He whispered her name over and over. Anna locked herself in her room, but noticed that there were small openings in the wall through which she could see into her apartment. She covered them with tape, but she could feel her neighbor's gaze piercing through the walls. Her despair grew when she found photos of herself, taken from inside her own apartment, scattered around the living room. In one of them, she was sleeping. In another, she was reading in the armchair. Anna realized that her neighbor had access to her apartment. She searched every corner and found a small maintenance door behind the closet that connected the two apartments. She locked it with a chair, but she knew it wasn't safe. In the following days, Anna tried to maintain her routine, but the fear was constant. The neighbor started leaving little notes under her door. "You are not alone. I will take care of you. There is no point in running away." The tone of the messages varied between threatening and patronizing, which only increased the terror. Anna began to hear keys turning in locks during the night and light footsteps walking around the room. With no signal, no help, Anna decided to try to escape. The next morning, she packed a backpack and waited for her neighbor to leave. When she heard his door slam, she ran for the exit, but found the front door locked again. The neighbor appeared behind her, smiling. "You shouldn't try to leave, Anna. It's safe here." She ran upstairs, looking for a way out through the roof, but all the doors were locked. She locked herself in the bathroom, shaking, while her neighbor knocked on the door, saying he wanted to talk. Anna found an iron pipe and prepared to defend herself. After hours of tension, she heard sirens in the distance. The police, alerted by a friend worried about Anna's disappearance, broke down the front door. The neighbor was found trying to escape through the basement. In his apartment, police found detailed records of other missing residents, photos, personal items, and a diary with disturbing entries. Anna was rescued in a state of shock, but survived. The building was evacuated, and the case was covered in the newspapers. Anna never returned to the apartment. The neighbor was convicted, but never revealed the fate of the other victims. To this day, the building remains empty, and passersby on Linienstrasse avoid looking at the windows of 34B, where they say, the weight of the eyes of those who watch in silence can still be felt. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving situations with no signal, no way out, and no help. So, which one scared you the most? Will any of them make you think twice before venturing into isolated places? Tell us in the comments which was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the darker side of isolation and despair, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more spine-chilling stories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take advantage now to subscribe and activate the bell.